And a very warm welcome to this week's edition of the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale. I'm joined by two authors for the programme this evening. Katharine Birbalsingh, she's the author of To Miss With Love, which sounds like a James Bond title, actually. But actually, it's about her experiences of teaching in an inner-city school. It's been serialised in the Sunday Times over the past couple of weeks. Absolutely fascinating reading. And we're also joined by Angela Saini, who's written a book called Geek Nation, How Indian Science is Taking Over the World. It's published by Hodder and Stoughton, hardback, £20, published at the end of the week. I should have said Catherine's book is £9.99 paperback, published also at the end of the week by Penguin. Well, welcome to the programme, one and all. Katharine, let's start off with you. Now, this time last year, I guess you were only known to your pupils, or students, as the more politically correct
yes,
teachers in your school like to refer to them. And then you took the nation by storm at the Conservative Party conference, and tell us how that came about.
Yes, I did. Well, I was invited to go and speak, and I spoke thinking, I suppose, that I was speaking to a small audience. I certainly didn't expect what happened. You know, I didn't think that I would end up out of a job. But my book had been written before, and it's coming out now because it takes a long time to publish a book, which talks about my experiences in secondary education, and I suppose visits the same themes that I talked about at the Conservative Party conference. And
before that, you'd written a blog, hadn't
yes,
you?
That's
right. Where anonymously, where you had detailed a lot of the experiences, I guess, that feature in the book. Why was there such a reaction to what you said?
Well, I think some people were a bit relieved that someone was finally saying something. I think people were happy to hear kind of the truth being spoken. I had originally written the book with the intention of it being published anonymously because I knew the dangers of saying these kinds of things. But now, obviously, you know, the game has been played and my name is out there. But I think it's important that debate be open, and up until now, that debate has been rather shut, and because teachers can't speak.
Let's just briefly explore that debate, because what was it that you were saying? Effectively, you were taking on the educational establishment, and you weren't doing it from a Tory point of view, it has to be said, although that's what, of course, people are accusing you of.
Yes.
But you were doing it in a way that really questioned the entire educational establishment of the last 30 or 40 years in this country.
And that's absolutely right, exactly. It's a trend that we've been going down over some time, and the whole prizes for all culture, the dumbing down of exams, the lack of discipline in our classrooms, these are all things that need improving. And the book, which I have ordinary school in there, it's called ordinary for a reason, because it's just meant to present a perfectly ordinary school which you would find in any of our cities or our bigger towns. That isn't to say that all state schools are like that. Some state schools are better and some state schools are worse. But the idea really is to show a teacher's diary, what a teacher's life is like, and the involvement of the students and the other teachers and so on, and get a feel for what our schools are really like nowadays.
And I mean, reading some of the anecdotes that you relate in the book, and certainly the ones that were serialised in the Sunday Times over the past couple of weeks, I mean, you as a teacher are involved in horrific situations that actually, as a teacher, I would say you should never have to face. You are there to teach, not deal with this catalogue of violent incidents that you talk about.
Well, I mean, the Sunday Times, of course, has published kind of the worst bits of the book in that sense.
Or the best bits.
Well, you know, there are lots of parts of the book that talk about the bonding between children and between teachers and the support they give each other. And you watch children turn themselves around. There's some really lovely moments in there. So you don't come away from the book thinking, oh my goodness, why would anybody ever want to teach? I think it does a good job of demonstrating why someone would love teaching in urban London, but also why one would get really frustrated with the system, because it's always the system that I'm having a go at, which lets down our teachers and it lets down our students, and that's what the book is trying to do. I think it tells the story from the point of view of the pupils, which is really important, because sometimes sound bites from me in the press, they get misled and people say all sorts of silly things and people misinterpret, because it's just a sound bite. Whereas the book carries nuance and is able to really tell the story of state education.
Now tell me what happened after you'd made your speech at the Tory Party conference. It was a YouTube sensation, I think it's fair to say. I didn't actually see you do the speech live, but I kept getting texts and emails saying, have you seen this teacher? You've got to watch it on YouTube.
Oh, I see.
And it was a real, a real tour de force. And there was a huge reaction to it, but it ended up with you losing your job.
Yes, well, on a personal level, I have paid massively for what I've done because I loved my job. You know, it was a 15-minute bike ride to school. I loved the kids. I loved my life, and it was perfect. And then it all got thrown up in the air. So on a personal level, I have paid a huge
You kind of
cost.
threw it up in the air yourself, though, didn't you?
Well, you
no
say
one
that.
did it for you.
Well, yes, but I had no idea. I just didn't realize. And people say I'm naive, and I suppose I'm naive. I didn't realize I was talking to such a large group of people. You know, I just didn't know. I knew what I was doing was a bit naughty, but I certainly didn't think that I would end up in this situation. And
you've been a bad girl.
Yeah, I have been a bit bad. But I think on a larger level, in terms of the country, I think it's really important that we open up debate and that we let people know what's going on. And that's what To Miss with Love does. It opens up a world for people who are not in teaching. And I know teachers who have read it, they all say to me, oh yeah, this is our experience. And so it's great for teachers to read as well because they don't feel like they're going mad. They know that somebody else is experiencing the same frustration as they have.
Angela, your book is predominantly about, it's called How Indian Science is Taking Over the World. What about the Indian education system? Are there any parallels that you can draw between what's happening in India and the kind of system that we have in this country? Or is the Indian system sort of way back, but when a lot of people in this country would think as it ought to have been in the 1950s, 60s?
It's strange, actually, listening to Katharine, because I'm a product of the London State School education system, and then I went to study engineering, and I'm a good success story, if you like. I did well. And then going to India and then seeing how engineering students and science students are coping over there. There is a range. I mean, there are some really bad schools. There's a huge gap in providing basic literacy to a huge amount of the population. So there are problems that the country needs to overcome. But the best schools are really good. And it's not necessarily because of facilities or infrastructure. I spent a week at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi, which is one of the best engineering colleges in the whole country. And, the facilities were bad. They had rickety old benches and lecture theatres. There was no air conditioning, so in the summer the students would be sweltering hot. But they were just so enthusiastic. They loved it. The students were there, the teachers were there, and they were 100% behind each other. They were just so... It was a spirit that even though I studied engineering in this country, I have never seen before.
But has this sort of all must have prizes philosophy infiltrated Indian schools as it seems to have done here?
No, absolutely not. The Indian education system is arguably the most competitive in the world. So if you want to go to engineering college, close to 500,000 students will be sitting those exams, and a tiny proportion of them will get a place. And when you're in the college, if you don't come top of your year, then you suffer for it. So everyone's competing all the time. It's draining on the children because they're coached in the evenings and weekends. Almost all children who study in science and engineering are. It's very grueling for them. And the standards are high as a result. There's a reason that Indian engineers and scientists are taking over the world. It's because they really work for it.
And competition is part of that. And I would say, if you have competition in schools, it actually prepares you for what comes afterwards. Because whatever field you're in, you are competitive. How come competition is seen, Katharine, now as a really dirty word in the state education system?
I think it's about trying to make everyone feel better about themselves. I mean, I have to say, I think maybe India goes a bit too far. I just want a drop of that. Just a drop would be something, because we hardly have any competition at all. Benchmarking is unheard of. We're not allowed. The children don't even know really where they stand in comparison to their peers. Well, they don't know. And it's very difficult for a child to judge because his world is his classroom. He doesn't even know how the other children are behaving and achieving in the classroom next door, let alone in the local private school or in the better state school just down the road. So it doesn't do our children any good by not telling them the truth. I think we feel that we won't motivate them by telling them where they are, and we want to lift them up.
I can remember when I was at primary school back in the sort of late 60s, early 70s, and in our school reports we would have a ranking. Well, 25 kids in the class, and do you know, I was always number 2. That really rankled, but that really spurred me on to try and be number 1. I never got there, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Eve Marshall, that was the girl's name. She was. I still remember her now.
Exam results don't mean anything anymore. You know, if you get an A grade, there are loads of kids who've got A grades. You don't know where you are in that A grade.
Exactly, and that is the problem. And it's funny because I've visited schools around the world, in India, in China, in Brazil, all over, and I would tell the children about these schools, and some of these stories actually are in To Miss with Love, and the children would look at me and say, "Oh, well, thank goodness we don't live in those countries, because we'd have to work hard if we lived there," you know? And that's a terrible thing, because the harder you work, the more intelligent you become. The harder you work, the more successful you will be. And our children, because they're getting their gold stars no matter what they do, there's no real incentive to work very hard. And ultimately, like you say, when they come out into the world of work, we have betrayed them if we don't push them really hard at school. And so it's because I love the children, and it's because I love the state education system, that I am criticizing it. Because unless we recognize that there's a problem, we won't ever fix it. And unfortunately, there are too many people out there who think the best thing to do is to pretend there's nothing wrong, because we think somehow we're supporting the state system by pretending. And I think we need to stand up and say, actually, there is a problem, but that's okay. Doesn't mean we throw our hands up and give up. It means we fix it and we move on, and we learn from some other countries, like, say, India. You know, we could learn so much from them, but we think that we're Britain and we know better.
Well, you're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and I've got 2 wonderful authors in the studio with me, Katharine Birbalsingh, author of To Miss with Love, and Angela Saini, who's written a book called Geek Nation, How Indian Science is Taking Over the World, and we'll be hearing more from her in just a second. But if you've got any questions you'd like to put to Katharine or Angela, they're here in the studio until 10 o'clock, 0845 6060 973. Maybe you want to disagree with Katharine. I imagine if Fiona Miller, Alistair Campbell's partner, is often on the programme, if she's listening, I bet there's steam coming out of her ears. Come on, Fiona, give us a call, 0845 6060 973. The time now is 9:16. And it's time for Travel with Alan Joyce.
Thanks, Ian. Well, an update firstly on the tubes, and there's been quite a number of problems.
1.3.
And it's the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Katharine Birbalsingh and Angela Saini, who are our 2 authors for the next, with us for the next 40 minutes until 10 o'clock. We're going to go straight to your calls, 0845 6060 973. If you've got a question that you'd like to put to either Katharine or Angela, that's the number to call. Rachel is in West Horndon. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, we're doing very well. What's your comment?
I got on the cusp of the conversation about parents influencing their children and how school is coming into that. And I really think that it has nothing to do with school as much as in the education part, that when it comes to mannerisms and the way that people act and growing up in that sort of case, that it's all down to the parents. And me being an expat kid and growing up in 4 different countries, I really think that the way that my parents brought me up and the way that I interacted with people from different cultures and the way that they taught me and how I followed them means a lot more than it did from my school education. I don't think school gave me that much direction in how to interact with people as much as my parents did.
Rachel, thanks very much for your call. It's a terrible line, but let's go to Katharine on this, because, of course, a lot of the kids that you were teaching in your school won't have had the kind of parental influence that maybe Rachel's talking about, and you catalogue some of the consequences of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rachel, I agree that parents have a massive influence on their children. One of the reasons why I continually go on about the system, education system, is because I realise that I can't do that much about the parents. Parents are parents, and one can...
And you can't replace them either, can you?
I can't do anything about them, but what I can do is make a school experience the best possible experience for the child. And it's a shame that Rachel's own school experience, she feels, didn't give her that kind of support in terms of the kind of person she would become, because some schools do give an enormous amount to their children, and when children are lacking that at home, they look to their school to be able to support them, and we should, I think, be able to do that.
Let's go to Alan in Reigate. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Ian. Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening, ladies.
What's your point?
Well, I agree entirely that the only way is to teach children that competition is not a bad thing. Only by learning to compete will you actually learn how to deal with the real world that we're all going to have to live in as adults.
But there are disadvantages, though, Alan, aren't there? Because not everyone can be the best. Not everyone can compete with the best.
I agree entirely that is the case. I mean, I've been involved in a thing called aspirational attainment, which is about making the best of you, whilst at the same time doing nothing to others that you wouldn't want done to yourself. And it is all about attitude, about being positive, and about understanding you could be the best dustman in the world or you could be the best neurosurgeon in the world. But somewhere along the lines, you have to instill that there is nothing wrong in trying to be that best. And if that means you have to compete, that's what you have to do.
Alan, thank you very much for your call. Angela, let's turn to you. Did you want to write the best book ever? Was that why you started writing?
Yes. No, well, I'm a geek, so I guess Geek Nation was something I would have always written, maybe. But as a science journalist, I used to work in India actually years ago, about 7 years ago when I first left university. I went to work for a features magazine there. And at that time, there wasn't that much science and exciting science and engineering happening. And then I went back in 2009 to do a piece for Wired magazine. And everything had changed. It felt like, somebody had turned a switch, and suddenly there was all this exciting, original innovation happening, and it was just thrilling. And I came back from that and just thought, I have to write about this.
And why was it happening? Why had things changed?
I spent ages trying to figure that out. The closest I came to having an answer for it was that in around 1991-92, India liberalised its economy. So before that, it was a kind of quasi-socialist state. And at that date, it...
Hugely bureaucratic
Hugely
as well.
bureaucratic, really difficult to get anything done. Getting a passport could take you months, if not years. And then suddenly it started opening up to the world. It became a free market economy. MTV came in, Coca-Cola came in. And with that influx of outside ideas also came a liberalisation of thought, if you like. So it's only now that we're seeing a generation beyond that. So the first generation that grew up in that truly liberalised economy with freedom of thought are coming of age now and starting to work.
But India is such a massive country, isn't it? It's really only pockets of the country that you could describe in that way, surely. Most of the country is still ridden with poverty and isn't really taking part in this revolution that you talk about.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But science and technology touch the lives of everyone. I mean, what Katharine and the caller was talking about earlier was aspiration. That if you don't have aspiration, then you struggle because you can't reach for something. What India has is aspiration. That's instilled in every kid. And not every kid will be a success. But there is this idea, it's a very American idea actually, this American dream idea that you can make it. If you work really hard, you have a shot. And in India now, you have a shot.
And do you think India is sort of emerging now as a world power? And you see, we had the Slumdog Millionaire film, which I guess was the first time a lot of people in this country will have actually seen anything about India at all, because we don't really have Indian television programmes, we don't have lots of Indian literature in this country, I guess. And you've now gradually got sort of Indian characters coming into big TV programmes. Heroes, one of my favourite programmes. One of the characters in that, Sendil Ramamurthy, who plays Mohinder Suresh. He's your ultimate science geek, isn't he? Yeah. Really?
I love these American Indian geeks. My favourite is actually the guy in Short Circuit. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember.
He was brilliant. They've entered popular culture, this idea of the Indian geek. I'm going to give a talk at Google later in March, and Silicon Valley is full of Indian geeks. These are guys who were educated in India, went to America and built some of the most incredible IT companies.
And why has that happened?
Maybe it's the education system. If you look historically, it does seem sometimes when you look at India and China, wow, their rise has been completely sudden. It's not actually that sudden. India's roots actually go back about 50 years. So if you look at the dawn of independence, when India was handed back over from empire to govern itself, Jawaharlal Nehru was India's first Prime Minister. He was a scientist. He was a geek himself. He studied natural sciences at Cambridge. And he instilled this idea that India should be a more scientific, rational country. If you look at the Indian constitution, there's a line in there saying that Indian citizens should develop the scientific temper. They should be more logical and scientific.
Well, I'm going to ask you in a minute how on earth we can reinstill that ethos into this country, because we've lost it somewhere along the way. You're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, Katharine Birbalsingh and Angela Saini. If you'd like to ask either of them a question, 0845 6060 973 is the number to call.
LBC 97.3.
Now, if you'd like to see the photos from the LBC RSA live debate earlier on in the evening, they're now live on lbc.co.uk. Just go to the front page and you can see what the event looked like. Clive Ball's here to tell us what's on his programme at 10. Hi, Clive.
Hi, Ian. Yes, I'll be here at 10. Amongst our topics tonight, the idea of this no-fly zone for Libya.
About time.
Yeah, is it a good idea? You're quite happy about our military being involved in this?
It should have happened a week ago.
There's one vote for yes.
Too late now.
All right. Well, we'll be looking at the pros and cons of that. We're also going to talk about traffic lights. There's an interesting report from the RAC looking at how many we've got, the growth of them. We've got far more traffic lights than we used to have, and maybe we've got too many.
Well,
and maybe we could run them differently.
I'm sure I saw something recently, in fact I think we might have done it on the programme, where Boris had announced some initiative where he's going to cut a lot of them out.
Well, he says these things.
Well, he does, doesn't he? Bless him, bless him.
Maybe in a couple of years' time. Yes, we're going to look at the pros and cons of traffic lights as well. And are you a pleb?
What a question.
That's not quite as rude as it sounds. It's people lacking everyday basic skills, supposedly. Plebs. This is a phrase that has been coined as a research into what basic skills you have. Things like poaching an egg, for example, or changing a tyre, or do you know how to wire a plug?
No.
Oh dear. Well, then,
So
you are in that case.
A
yes. So I'm going to be asking what basic jobs we should all know how to do.
Oh, dear.
Okay.
It wouldn't be a very long conversation if I was a caller, I'll tell you.
Or a very long list, maybe,
Well,
that you need to
indeed.
know. Yeah. All right. Thank
Okay,
you very
Clive,
much.
Thank you very much. We'll see you at 10 o'clock. But before then, we're going to continue our conversation with our two authors, Katharine Birbalsingh. She's the author of To Miss With Love. It's published by Penguin this week in paperback at $9.99. And Angela Saini, who's written a book called Geek Nation, How Indian Science is Taking Over the World. And I think this is a really, really interesting subject, because I think everyone in this country has quite a positive attitude towards India, but we don't know enough about it. And I think that your book is going to actually lift the lid on not just on Indian science, but on a lot of sort of Indian culture, in Indian society, which I feel I don't know enough about. Do you think I'm typical?
I would hope so. I would hope that that's what it does. When I was there were loads of travel books on India which give you this, and programs as well, which give you this idea of, slums and religion and that kind of thing, and festivals and stuff. But, what is life like in an ordinary household? What is life like for an ordinary kid? That's what I was trying to explore when I was there. And, I have family in India, so I have some idea. But, India is such a broad, huge country. It's vast, and everybody has, different perspectives, and everybody has different lives, just like any other country. But, I was trying to get more beneath the surface.
And you were talking about how much store India sets by science and really encourages scientists and boffins and geeks and nerds, as you might call them. How can we replicate that in this country? Because we used to be known the world over as one of the leading nations in discoveries in science, and yet successive governments over the last 50 years just don't seem to have taken science seriously.
It really breaks my heart to see what is happening to science and engineering in this country. In the budget last year, they announced that funding for science and for research in this country would be frozen for the next 4 years, which means with inflation, that's a fall in real terms. Countries like India and China are ramping up their spending. And there will come a point, no doubt, if this continues, that they'll cross each other. that Britain will fall and India will rise. And there is no doubt that, you know, the level of industrialization of a country, the level of development is correlated with how much you invest in R&D. That's how important it is. This is where manufacturing industries come from.
And Katharine, how much is our education system to blame for this? Because I often think that science isn't given the importance in the curriculum that it ought to have. I mean, there are lots of subjects that I think ought to be given more. I don't think languages, we've talked about that on the programme over the last couple of weeks. Languages now seem to be ignored in the curriculum.
Yes.
But science in particular, it's been dumbed down because you can now do general science. You don't do physics, biology, chemistry as you used to do.
Well, you can.
You can, but you can also do this more generic science subject.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of our subjects have been dumbed down. And, I mean, it's interesting, when Angela said a moment ago, she said, I'm a geek. It took me by surprise.
She doesn't look like one, does she?
Well, that's the thing. You know, she's young, attractive, trendy, and she can say I'm a geek and feel really proud of doing that. And where our children really don't have freedom is they don't have the freedom to be able to, and in To Miss With Love, many times the children express the kind of fear that they have of being a geek because they don't want to be neaky, is what they say. And in order to avoid that...
What?
A neek is a geek.
Is it? Oh, right.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The neek is the new geek. and Angela so expresses that so well. In India, it's okay to be a geek. In fact, you want to be. You want to be. That's the thing.
But you have to look like a geek to be a geek, though, don't you?
No, I am a geek. I might not, you know, have the outward appearance of one always, although I do have a very big pair of glasses at home. But, you know, geekiness is a quality on the inside. It's about a passion and intelligence and using
Exactly. And that's why science, for instance, when you talk about how we're falling behind, I mean, of course, investment is really important. But some of our schools have science departments which are staffed entirely by supply teachers. And I'm not exaggerating. Some of our schools in our inner cities are staffed entirely by supply teachers, the science departments. So how on earth are those children being taught properly? It's not the fault of the supply teachers, but you remember your days at school. When there was a supply, you ran in there and you thought, yippee, this is a day off.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate that science and maths in particular are real shortage subjects when it comes to teaching. And we've got to raise our standards in our schools if we're going to compete with future economies like India.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been talking tonight on the programme earlier about the growing gap between rich and poor in this country. And I can imagine that in India, where the economy is motoring ahead, the gap is probably growing there as well, where you do have this sort of rich elite that are maybe the entrepreneurs, maybe the scientists, who are working extremely hard, making a lot of money, but actually leaving a lot of other people behind. How can science actually alleviate poverty and help bridge that gap, do you think, Angela? That
was a major driver of why I wrote the book, because science is really doing that. Technology is reaching out to the poor people. There are loads of examples of this. I think the best is probably electronic governance. So in this country, we've had such trouble trying to implement big state-level IT projects. In India, because there are so many cheap engineers who are very well skilled, they're doing it at a fraction of the cost and doing it really well. So they're rolling out a national ID scheme, biometric ID scheme, which means that every person in the country will be able to claim state benefits and, you know, be linked into the government. They're setting up kiosks on every block level. A block is about 6 villages. So, on, you know, to that tiny level, you will be able to access state funding, you'll be able to pay your taxes, get land records, everything online through these kiosks. And it stretches through everything. I mean, India's space program, the satellites are what have given it its huge telecoms industry now. And poor people have mobile phones. There are 500 million mobile phone connections in India. And it would be impossible to say that that isn't reaching out to the poor, because that is half the population.
But doesn't that provide a problem, though? Because if India is producing all of these wonderfully bright people, and then they're all going off to Silicon Valley or coming to this country. I mean, apparently 1 in 5 medical staff in the UK are of Indian descent. I mean, that's a staggering figure. And yet, if all of the brightest people leave, what does that say?
The brain drain happened from, I'd say, around the 1970s to the 1990s. You will find Silicon Valley Indians going back to India now. You will find people like me. You know, my dad was an engineer who worked as an engineer in Kolkata, then came to this country to work, And now I am an engineer and I'm going to India to do my work. You know, I practice science journalism there as much as I do here. And there's loads of examples of this.
And you mentioned the space programme earlier, and of course that's in the news today because the government says it's still going to give development aid to India, which a lot of people find rather perplexing. Why would we give international aid to a country that has a space programme?
The response I would give to that is, don't think of a space program as a high-tech extravagance. It's not. It's actually been very important to India's mode of development. So the space program actually started in the 1960s, around the time that Neil Armstrong went up with NASA to the moon. They set up a really modest, very cheap satellite program. Those satellites, the whole world said to India, "You're crazy. Why are you building rockets and satellites? You can't feed your people." India was on the verge of, parts of India were on the verge of famine. But if it hadn't launched those satellites in 1975, around that time, then the telecoms industry would never have taken off. Then the IT industry, which relies on those telecoms links, would never have happened. And that IT industry, which is now worth billions of dollars, is what is driving that country forward. That's a growing middle class there.
And I guess, Katharine, it's interesting that India has a programme like this that allows people to dream dreams. I mean, to think of the impossible.
Exactly.
And for kids going through education nowadays, I wonder how much kids are really encouraged to think the impossible, to dream the dream, and they're just bogged down in the stodge of the curriculum.
Well, you know, if in a way, I almost wish they were bogged down. If that would actually be good. Some of them just aren't engaging at all. That in some of our schools, the children are coming out literally with nothing. I mean, when you think that the EBAC, the 5 academic subjects, that only 16% of the country, 16% have managed to get 5 C's at GCSE in 5 academic subjects. That means the vast majority of our children haven't even got 5 C's at GCSE. Now, if we compare that to children in India, for instance, I mean, we can't compare. And so we aren't equipping our children properly, and it's best, what we need to do is look at that, and then we need to change that. And Intimates with Love, you see children in lessons and so on, you see them, you can see why children can disengage with their education, because we're not teaching them stuff that's interesting enough. We're not teaching them enough stuff, really. The knowledge that's being taught has been so dumbed down that our children are not being engaged properly, and we expect too little of them. We think to ourselves, well, they're poor, they grew up in a council estate, they're ethnic minority, therefore they can't really achieve. And that's wrong. If we expected the highest out of them, children will always rise to the game. If you keep pulling the bar up, they will keep moving up with you.
You see, I listen to what you say, I listen to the way you say it, and to me, you're clearly one of those inspirational teachers that kids remember. I mean, I'm sure, Angela, you will remember a couple of teachers in your education that made that real difference to you. I certainly do. And you're now lost to the state education system. I mean, you must feel gutted.
Well, I am planning on setting up a free school.
Well, we'll come on to that in a second. But you've effectively been told you will never work in state education again because of what you said.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying, one isn't allowed to say. And like I said, I've done this at great personal cost. I mean, people think I want some kind of fame. I don't. I like, I'm somebody who works all the time. I would work 70-hour weeks. I'm obsessed with school. I love it. I haven't benefited personally out of this at all. I mean, I've lost more in my salary since having lost my job than any money that I would ever earn from my book. But I wish I could get back into the state sector. I love it. I love making that difference to those kids. And Intimates with Love, you see the kids being cheeky. You can see them. Once I had the kids, for instance, they turned the clock forward before I got there. So they then said, oh, the lesson's finished. And I dismissed them and they all went running off. And I kept thinking, why isn't the bell gone? Why isn't the bell gone? And that's the kind of thing that makes school so much fun. I love it. I love the kids and I do miss them so much.
Well, you're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, Katharine Birbalsingh and Angela Saini. We'll hear more from them in just a second. It's now 9:45. Time for travel with Alan Joyce.
Thanks, Ian. Well, if you're heading into Feltham tonight, Bedfont Lane.
Available now.
And that was, of course, the voice of Nick Ferrari, and Nick will be back at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning with his breakfast show. Scotland Yard says it's going to adopt a new softly approach to policing demonstrations. Local police stations could be replaced with front counter services on the high street. Plus, the royal wedding is fast approaching. So how are security preparations for the big day going? You'll have your chance to put your questions to Acting Commissioner Tim Godwin when he joins Nick Ferrari in the studio tomorrow morning from 7 a.m. Now, just a reminder that if you want to see the photos from the LBC live debate at the RSA this evening, they're now live on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk. And also, just to tell you, next week on the book club, we've got another two authors coming in. Jessica Kane, who's written a novel about the 1943 Bethnal Green tube crash. It's absolutely fascinating. And also, David Baddiel will be here. He's going to be talking about his new book, The Death of Eli Gold. But let's concentrate on this week now, because our two authors are still here with us. Katharine Birbalsingh, author of To Miss with Love, published by Penguin this week, $9.99 in paperback, and Angela Saini, who's written a book called Geek Nation, How Indian Science is Taking Over the World. That's a more expensive book. It's £20 in hardback from Hodder and Stoughton, but worth every penny, I'm absolutely sure. Angela, how do you think this book is going to go down in India? Because it's a bit critical of Indian science at times.
Yeah, Indians are actually pretty good at criticising themselves. They are good at being introspective, but they're not very good at taking criticism from outside. So, for example, when Slumdog Millionaire was made, you know that Danny Boyle got a lot of flack for that from inside India. But, you know, what I've written is honest. It's in the words of actual Indians, and I've got one foot in both countries because I am of Indian origin. So I would hope that people will find it honest. It's optimistic and it's happy, while at the same time not glossing over the facts.
And Katharine, how do you think teachers are going to react to your book? Are you going to get a lot of people saying, well, she speaks for the silent majority, or are you going to get a lot of abuse?
Well, the thing is, of course, teachers
both.
aren't able to speak out. Only the teachers who defend the system can ever speak, because the way it works really is if you criticize the system, then you necessarily implicate your school. So no teacher wants to do that. And so literally they can't talk. I mean, I've had teachers run up to me on the street saying, well done for saying what you did. I'm not going to tell you my name. And then they run away. Or I get kind of anonymous emails from teachers saying, oh, I work in this place, but I'm not telling you, you know, and they do absolutely recognize what I'm talking about. So what is unfortunate is that we can only hear from one side of the debate. But what I do hope will happen with the book is that it will open up that debate at least, so that people can see this. Because I think the silent majority, as you say, of the public, I think people know deep down what's going on. Employers are regularly complaining about children coming out of state schools not being able to write a simple letter, not being able to do basic mathematical problems. And I think finally now, To Miss with Love is kind of explaining that a bit and showing how children and teachers are caught up in the system, desperately trying to achieve something, but because they're so trapped, they can't do it. I mean, India, for instance, I went and visited, and in fact, India appears in To Miss with Love, a couple of the schools that I visited. One school I don't talk about in To Miss with Love was we were in the slums in India, the poorest people living on, whole families living on less than £1 a day. And there was this woman in her one little room, and the little toddlers would come in, kind of 3-4-year-olds and so on, and they'd pay 25 rupees a month to be able to attend. And she had them all sitting there, and she would teach them their alphabet, and they would sing. And it was amazing, real poverty, what people could do with that. And yet we here in a developed country with all these resources and interactive whiteboards and computers all over the place and so on, and yet somehow we seem to be falling behind worldwide. When you look at the PISA statistics, it's shocking really what's been happening especially over the last 10 years, how we've dropped in terms of our achievements. So I'm hoping with the changes that are coming now in education, and I hope with the ordinary public, if they can just stand up and demand more. I want people to be outraged. I want them to get up and say, this isn't good enough. I want more out of the education system.
And you're also trying to start your own free school under the government's new legislation. How far have you got with that?
Well, I've only just started, so I'm setting up my steering group. But I'd like to work in a deprived area. Lambeth has a shortage of places, and I live in Brixton. I'm especially interested in raising black underachievement. I think it would suit me perfectly. I love my urban kids, and everyone says, "Why don't you go work in the private sector?" But I don't want to work in the private sector. My skills are with urban kids. That's what I love. So my only option now, really, is to set up a free school, and I'll be able to bring the success stories that I have seen in my career, where my values and my methods of no nonsense, of tough love, of making sure ties are to the top and shirts are tucked in at all times and expecting the very best.
Sounding like Anne Widdecombe.
But that's what works. When children come from chaotic homes, and some of them do, they work best when there is order at school. And when there is more of a liberal, laissez-faire kind of approach, they lose their way. And it's up to us as the adults to hold that bar high. And that's what I would love to do in my new school, which is what I hope to do, and which would open in September 2012.
Can I ask one thing, Catherine? In your school, can you make sure that they teach coding? Because I didn't learn to code until I went to university, and it's such a necessary skill these days.
What does that mean?
Computer coding.
Okay.
Yeah, being able to write code. It's so important.
That's a very good example. For instance, in so many schools, we do ICT GCSE instead of computing GCSE. You go into the private sector, you find them all doing computing GCSE, where they will learn those kinds of skills instead of skills which are not so good at preparing children for the world of IT later on.
I remember back in the days when I did my degree, I did a module computer-assisted language learning. This was back in 1984. We had BBC Basic computers, and I couldn't even use those. But that's another story. Angela, what next for you after all the publicity of your book, after your tour to India? What's the next project?
That's under my hat. I really don't know. I am planning to write another science book. I don't know exactly what that will be. We're just in talks at the moment. But I'm concentrating.
It's quite an achievement to get a book like this published by a big publisher like Hodder, because I can imagine a lot of publishers being quite reticent about it.
Well, it was the India publishers that really got excited about it. There's been loads of books in India recently written from the perspective of someone who works in IT and engineering, just because it's a huge part of the culture there. And they got really excited about it there, and they transmitted that enthusiasm to Hodder in the UK.
Well, Catherine, I guess you're going to be spending all of your time trying to open your new school. We wish you the very best of luck with that. Thank you both for being on the book club this evening. Just to run through the details of both of your books again, they're both published at the end of the week, should be available in the bookshops. Obviously, you can buy them online too. In fact, you can buy them through the LBC website if you go to my presenter page. Katharine Birbalsingh's book, To Miss With Love, paperback, $9.99, published by Penguin. Angela Saini's book is called Geek Nation, How Indian Science is Taking Over the World. It's published by Hodder and Stoughton in hardback at £20. And next week, I'll be talking to David Baddiel about his new novel, The Death of Eli Gold, and Jessica Kane, who's written a novel about the 1943 Bethnal Green tube crash, which actually not a lot of people know about. Just a reminder, the photos from the LBC Live debate are on the LBC website at the moment. Coming up next is Clive Bull. I'll be back tomorrow at 7. This is LBC 97.3.
On behalf of all of us at British Midland International.